Welcome back to Movie Recap. Today I'm gonna show you a 2016 American action thriller film called Patriots Day. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie begins in April, wherein Sergeant Tommy Saunders captures a suspect hiding in his apartment room. Tommy then bangs his door and shouts his name, Harold, to take his weapons out and surrender. Yet, Harold seems to be trying to fight against Tommy as he refuses to open his door. With two police officers standing behind Tommy's back, they let Tommy kick the door to catch Harold. Afterward, Tommy follows the running Harold towards his room, saying to put his clothes on while ordering the police officers to get him. Later, the Boston Police Commissioner, Ed Davis, arrives at the apartment where Tommy is capturing the suspect. Afterward, Commissioner Davis proceeds to the third floor upstairs to join Harold's investigation. Then, on the other hand, Sergeant Tommy finally catches Harold and puts him in the dining area to investigate. Upon investigating, Sergeant Tommy asks about Sean Creek A, whom Harold pushed after getting hit with a smoothie on his head. Then suddenly, Commissioner Davis enters the room, asking Sergeant Tommy if what he's doing is a homicide. So, Sergeant Tommy immediately corrects him, saying that he gets misinformed, and what he is doing is not a homicide. To Tommy's surprise, he suddenly realizes that an iron hits Harold's head and not a smoothie. However, Harold seems eager to use the word, smoothie, and keeps repeating it to Commissioner Davis and Sergeant Tommy. Afterward, Sergeant Tommy approaches the commissioner as he suggests to be a captain, a deputy super, or be a commissioner like him because he can't take much more of pointless cases any longer. However, Commissioner Davis makes his final decision to disapprove his request about letting him off from a punishment duty the next day, telling Sergeant Tommy to continue his job in 5 hours. Unfortunately, Sergeant Tommy urges to work on the Boston Marathon for the next day. Meanwhile, in Kensky and Downs' residence, Jessica and Patrick have their conversation in peace as Jessica shares the new necklace Mr. Flanagan gave to her. Upon talking, Jessica suddenly opens up their to-do list on Patriots Day while walking towards the kitchen to prepare the pizza and wine for their dinner. Afterward, both of them sit at the table to eat their food as they continue their conversation, in which Patrick finalizes their plan for Patriots Day. First, watch the marathon, and the third one, getting down to Fenway as they yell for the Red Sox. Patrick then eventually tells the reason why Mrs. Flanagan wanted her to have the necklace, and that is because she knows Jessica would hold Mr. Flanagan's hands once he gave the necklace. Later, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Lee finishes creating a robotic animal with her groupmates when suddenly, Officer Sean Collier enters to greet Lee. Afterward, Lee talks about the Zack Cowboy concert, and Sean answers it, saying that it will be a cultural experience, so they better attend the event because Sean will get them hats. Lee then pushes Sean outside the room as she tells the things she wants to have at the party: fried chicken, a cold beer on a Friday night, and jeans that fit too tight. Surprised, Sean suddenly feels happy knowing that Lee will come. Patriots Day comes the following day. The Tsarnaev brothers, whose names are Joe Carr and Tamerlan, are watching some clips about the terrorists' video on a laptop while having their breakfast. Then, on the other hand, Sergeant Tommy begins his exercise in his basement as he gets ready for his duty as police for the Boston Marathon. Then, while Sergeant Tommy wears his uniform, Carol suddenly coos to his ears and tries teasing him. But then, Carol takes it back immediately, saying that Sergeant Tommy must cut his hair first and finish his duty. Afterward, Sergeant Tommy feels down upon wearing his uniform, convincing himself that he looks like a clown, so Carol reassures him that he looks better while laughing. Meanwhile, Sergeant Jeffrey Pugliese buys his breakfast at Dunkin' Donuts and orders his favorite, the blueberry muffin, and a cup of hot coffee. Afterward, he drives his way to his office to begin his work. At the Boston Marathon, Sergeant Tommy arrives and talks to Boston's police superintendent, Billy Evans, who gives him the task to guard on the finish line. Sergeant Tommy then tries to refuse his assignment, but Billy tells him that it's his welcome back, meaning he shouldn't ruin it. So, Sergeant Tommy will only smile in front of all the VIPs and let them all remember who Tommy is. Unfortunately, Sergeant Tommy fails to convince Billy Evans as he leaves him behind for the marathon from Hopkinton to Boston. Later, the Boston Marathon begins, and the Tsarnaev brothers drive to the event. Then, on the other hand, Sergeant Tommy keeps himself busy as he guards the finish line. At the same time, the young couple Patrick Downs and Jessica Kensky eventually attend the marathon as the audience. Suddenly, Carol calls Sergeant Tommy to give him his fatter knee brace that he forgot to bring. Then, instead of thanking his wife, Sergeant Tommy makes a joke, saying that he failed to get it on purpose so that Carol could visit him on the marathon. However, the Tsarnaev brothers eventually arrive at the event during the marathon. Upon walking, the two of them automatically separate as they position themselves while holding a bomb inside their bag. As they prepare, Commissioner Davis suddenly arrives at the event, and talks with Sergeant Tommy to compliment his excellent work. Afterward, Tamerlan leaves the handbag on the crowded people, same with Dzhokhar, who is only centimeters away. Then, as soon as the bags drop at the floor, the Tsarnaev brothers gradually leave as bombs eventually detonate, causing widespread panic to the people. Unfortunately, the young couple Patrick Downs and Jessica Kensky gets involved in the explosion. The police officers then immediately respond to take them to a separate hospital as they get injured. However, aside from them, Steve Wolfenden, a family man, gets wounded, too, and separated from his toddler son, Leo. But luckily, the police officer takes Leo to a safe location while Steve is getting into the hospital. Unfortunately, Patrick and Jessica's legs get severely lacerated, requiring them to amputate their legs before it gets worse. Meanwhile, Sergeant Tommy instantly searches for evidence while helping injured people and the victims who unluckily get separated from their loved ones after the explosion. Tommy then radios the police officers to send 2 more ambulances from the Ring Road, and runs toward the second bomb site to check the other injured people. Afterward, he orders the other police officers to clear the perimeter, assuming more bombs could be in the area. Later, FBI Special Agent in Charge Richard Des Lauriers arrives at the event together with his men and Commissioner Davis. As he walks, he eventually asks where the bombs happened during the event. Des Lauriers is assigned to investigate the bombings while collaborating with Boston Police Commissioner Davis. Then, after Sergeant Tommy answers some of his questions, Des Lauriers makes sure they all collect the cell phones, and any other gadgets they find. Afterward, Des Lauriers finds out that the terrorists make the bombing attacks, so he calls the officers to meet him at the command center. After a while, Des Lauriers and his men arrive at Black Falcon Terminal. Afterward, they set up the operations tents to find the suspects behind the bombing attacks. Then, on the other hand, Commissioner Davis confirms to the media that they haven't charged anyone at the moment, and asks the public to help them supplement the investigation, wherein the people who took videos during the bombings are encouraged to turn them into Boston police. A while later, Sergeant Tommy arrives at the terminal to join the investigation. Then, upon watching the FBI doing their job to investigate the attack, Des Lauriers suddenly announced no evidence confirmed that it was a suicide attack. So, the IEDs were most likely remotely detonated, presuming that the bombs were homemade. However, while Des Lauriers is talking, Sergeant Tommy suddenly suggests interviewing the victims at the hospital to find the suspect. The following day, one of the FBI analysts reviewing the footage of the bombing eventually identifies the suspects, so he immediately calls Des Lauriers to check the footage with him. Then, upon showing the evidence, Des Lauriers calls Sergeant Tommy to go to the terminal. A few minutes later, Sergeant Tommy shows up, and Des Lauriers shows the footage of the suspect, and asks to work with him as they trace the suspect backward. Eventually, they identify Dzhokhar and Tamerlan as the bombers. However, Des Lauriers is reluctant to release their pictures to the public as they haven't further investigated them. He then excuses that his men still need to work with the investigation as he assumes that they are not terrorists, but residents of their country. However, the following day comes, and Commissioner Davis appeals to Des Lauriers to release the photos after finding out the bombers are not their guys. Yet, Des Lauriers and his men still pursue their decision to disagree with the Boston police, so Sergeant Tommy finally makes his talk, saying they need to trust them. Eventually, the press already leaked the photos even without permission from Des Lauriers. Fuming mad, Des Lauriers tells Commissioner Davis and his men that he will not let Fox News run the investigation, and only release the photos once the president wheels up. Later on, Des Lauriers makes his speech to the media, and releases the photos from the television news. Because of that, Dzhokhar tells his friend not to text him anymore after seeing his pictures on TV. But then his friend calls their other friends to get Dzhokhar's stuff from the dorm and hide it. Later at night, the Tsarnaev brothers drive their car to steal some pistols from the police. Then, upon stopping on the main street, they see Officer Sean inside his police vehicle. So, Tamerlan encourages his brother, Dzhokhar, to kill the MIT officer to get the guns. However, Dzhokhar fails to steal Sean's pistol after killing him inside the car. Afterward, Tamerlan grabs his brother, and runs while the Boston police officers receive the news about the crime scene at the main street. Meanwhile, Dun Meng, who is texting inside his car, suddenly gets into trouble as Tamerlan carjacks him after agreeing to help him out. Afterward, Tamerlan says that they committed the marathon bombing, killing innocent people at the event. Unfortunately, the Tsarnaev brothers plan to conduct another bombing attack in New York City. Tamerlan then forces Meng to give his wallet and everything he has inside the car, but then, suddenly, Dzhokhar knocks on Meng's window as he orders him to open the back. Afterward, the Tsarnaev brothers move their stuff at Meng's car, and take him as their hostage. Tamerlan then drives Meng's car as they go to Watertown. While he moves the car, Tamerlan orders Meng to give his ATM card to Dzhokhar as he will use it to withdraw some money and buy food at Shell gas station's convenience store. Then, upon arriving at the location, Dzhokhar informs Tamerlan that he can't fill the tank as it needs cash, not ATM. So, Tamerlan lets his brother go inside the convenience store to buy. Then, Meng uses it as an opportunity to escape while Tamerlan is busy watching his brother inside. Afterward, Meng runs and takes refuge at the mobile gas station across the street, and immediately alerts the police on Tsarnaev brothers' whereabouts by asking the staff to make a phone call with them. Luckily, the Watertown Police Sergeant Jeffrey receives the message as Meng also reports that they stole his car. Afterward, the reports immediately spread at the Boston police station, so Sergeant Tommy quickly arrives at the location and talks with Meng. While investigating, Meng talks about the Tsarnaev brothers' plan on bombing New York City, and gives Sergeant Tommy the GPS tracking number on his stolen car. Afterward, Watertown Police Sergeant Jeffrey Pugliese's men begin conducting door-to-door searches for the Tsarnaev brothers. Fortunately, one of the police officers, Joey, finally sees Tamerlan, and immediately reports it to the sergeant. However, upon leading to the pair, Tamerlan eventually shoots, and the scene leads to an armed confrontation. As the gunfight ensues, the Tsarnaev brothers begin throwing bombs while using firearms, harming several officers due to the explosion. However, while Tamerlan is shooting, a mad Pugliese officer Jeffrey fires at his ankle, giving him wounds to hinder his ability to gather more explosive bombs he may throw at them. Afterward, the weak Tamerlan orders his brother to run to New York City to continue the rampage without him, saying he will make his last stand, and kill all the police officers surrounding him. Tamerlan then shoots Officer Jeffrey, but he gets subdued while Dzhokhar drives the car, and accidentally runs over his brother in his flight instead of Officer Jeffrey. Unfortunately, Dzhokhar unconsciously kills his brother, and escapes the crime scene. After, Sergeant Tommy arrives at the scene, and takes Meng's car to follow when suddenly the Pugliese officers shoot his car, thinking that the Dzhokhar is inside. So, Sergeant Tommy gets out, and shows his face to confirm that they are attacking the wrong person. Afterward, he shouts at them to move out, and follow Dzhokhar while Officer Jeffrey calls for an ambulance to take Tamerlan to the hospital. Meanwhile, Des Lauriers orders the FBI hostage rescue team to get Tamerlan's wife, Catherine Russell, and Djokhar's college friends from UMass Dartmouth for the investigation. Afterward, he suddenly receives news from his men that Tamerlan is critically injured after the Pugliese police officers captured him. However, the mayors of Boston and New York are shutting down their city while searching for Djokhar. Later, the FBI hostage rescue team successfully gets Catherine and Djokhar's friends. Afterward, Mike Thomas, a member of the High Value Interrogation Group, suddenly appears, and informs Des Lauriers that he will take charge of the interview with Catherine. However, Catherine refuses to disclose her knowledge about her husband's illegal activities while talking to Veronica. Then, instead of answering, she chooses to play with her words while paraphrasing the Quran in defiance. Unfortunately, Veronica reports to Des Lauriers and Commissioner Davis that Catherine knows about the illegal activities, but she won't ever talk about it. Meanwhile, in Watertown, a local man named David Henneberry makes an excuse to his wife, saying he will smoke outside. But then, he suddenly sees the roller out of the hull, so he immediately walks and takes it. However, he realizes that someone is hiding in the covered boat in his backyard, which happens to be Djokhar. So, David immediately calls Sergeant Tommy and Superintendent William Evans to get into his house. Afterward, Sergeant Tommy arrives at the area, finally arresting Djokhar at the local man's backyard. Then, he and the police officers surround the suspect after a brief standoff for about 24 hours. Because of that, Commissioner Davis and the other staff at the terminal cheer after confirming that Djokhar surrenders. However, aside from them, the crowds also cheer in the street of the surrounding neighborhood, rejoicing in their victory. The movie ends with Sergeant Tommy and his colleagues, including his wife, Carol, celebrating their successful mission at the Boston Red Sox game as they get invited. Then, before the game starts, David thanks the Boston police for the heroism they made, and tells the crowd that nobody will dictate their freedom, so they must stay strong. In addition, the epilogue reveals that Djokhar is getting sentenced to death using lethal injection while awaiting his appeal in federal prison. Then, his friends, on the other hand, also get arrested for obstructing the bombing investigation. At the same time, the authorities continue seeking information about Tamerlan's wife, Catherine, about the bombings that she may get involved with. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this to help the channel out. Have a nice day.